today we're digging into an idea that might genuinely challenge some assumptions. What if something we widely consider, well, inherently good, like liberal democracy, actually becomes a major source of trouble? International instability, conflict, when you apply it to global politics.
It's a really provocative thought, isn't it?
It really is. And it's the central, often quite controversial argument from John J. Mearsheimer in his book, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities. So our mission here today is to unpack Mearsheimer's powerful thesis, basically that liberalism, while super valuable, beneficial within a country, can become a fool's guide for foreign policy.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this is a rigorous academic work we're talking about. It's theoretical at its core.
Right.
But Mearsheimer really makes an effort, and he says this himself, to make his arguments accessible, clear. For anyone who's, educated and interested, he calls himself a great communicator, not a great obfuscator.
I like that, a great communicator. And that clarity seems really key because his ideas didn't just appear out of thin air, did they?
No, absolutely not. The book's intellectual roots, you can trace them back to his time as a graduate student at Cornell, specifically a political theory seminar back in the fall of '76 with Professor Isaac Kramnik.
Wow, okay, 76, that's going back a bit. So what did he, take away from that specific class that ended up shaping his whole view on these big isms, liberalism, nationalism, realism? They're so central to his work.
Oh, it was incredibly formative for him. He credits that class they were reading, Plato, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, the big names, teaching him three really crucial things.
Okay, what were they?
First, the value of really contrasting these different political isms, putting them side by side to see their strengths, their weaknesses,
Makes sense.
Second, it hammered home that theory isn't just some abstract thing academics do. It's vital for understanding how the world actually works, with real implications for today's politics.
Right, practical theory.
Exactly. And third, maybe most critically for this book, he learned you can talk about deep theoretical stuff in simple, clear language, accessible language. He saw Kramnik do it, make complex ideas understandable, show why they mattered. And, The Great Delusion actually started as his Henry L. Stimson lectures at Yale. He specifically designed those lectures with that same kind of communicative clarity in mind.
Clarity and practical theory. Sounds perfect. Okay, let's unpack this core idea then. Mearsheimer says liberal states get this crusader mentality, especially when the power balance is in their favor, like in a unipolar world.
Yeah, where one state is just way more powerful than anyone else.
Exactly. So here's where it gets really interesting. What is this universalist logic of liberalism he talks about? And what does it sort of compel liberal states to do internationally?
Well, at its heart, liberalism cherishes inalienable rights, natural rights. And for committed liberals, this concern doesn't stop at their own borders. It extends to basically every individual on the planet.
Okay, so it's inherently outward-looking.
Inherently universalist, yeah. And this logic creates a really powerful incentive for liberal states to intervene, to get involved when they see rights being violated elsewhere. The belief is the best way to protect foreigners' rights is for them to live in a liberal democracy too.
So if I'm getting this right, it's not just about protecting rights passively. It's about actively reshaping other countries. It leads straight to regime change.
That's exactly his argument. Liberals, he argues, often have immense faith in their state's ability to do social engineering, not just at home, but abroad too.
Right.
They believe a world full of liberal democracies would just be more peaceful, less war, less nukes, less terrorism. And there's also the idea that spreading liberalism helps protect it at home from, external threats from non-liberal states.
Can you give an example of that thinking in action?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
George W. Bush's justification for invading Iraq is a classic case study for Mearsheimer. Bush said in March 2003 something like, America's interests in security and America's belief in liberty both lead in the same direction to a free and peaceful Iraq.
Yeah, that really captures it.
It really does. That crusading zeal, as Mearsheimer sees it.
Okay, so this distinction he draws between liberalism at home and liberalism abroad seems absolutely critical. He's saying it's great domestically, but internationally, it can make the world less peaceful and maybe even undermine liberalism back home. How does he make that argument? What's the mechanism there?
Well, he breaks down political liberalism into two main types you see in practice. He calls them modus vivendi liberalism and progressive liberalism.
Okay.
Think of modus vivendi as the more hands-off version, minimal state. It focuses on negative rights, freedoms from government interference, freedom of speech, press, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's pretty skeptical about big social engineering projects.
Got it. The classic limited government idea.
Sort of, yeah. Now, Compare that to progressive liberalism. This type favors a much more activist state. It wants to promote positive rights like equal opportunity, often through government programs, intervention, social engineering.
And Mearsheimer says the progressive version has won out.
Largely, yes. He argues it's basically triumphed in the modern world in practice.
Why? What drove that shift from the hands-off approach to the more activist one? Because that seems like a really important step in his argument about foreign policy.
He points to three big forces. First, the Industrial Revolution. It created these huge, complex systems, businesses, economies that seem to need state management, regulation, so a more active government role.
Makes sense. Complexity breeds intervention.
Second, the rise of nationalism. This created stronger ties between people and their state. People started demanding more from the state: welfare, support, intervention in daily life. And third, national security needs. Especially during long struggles like the Cold War, that required massive social engineering. Think about the civil rights movement in the U.S., addressing that became important for projecting American values against the Soviet Union.
Ah, interesting link.
Yeah. And you see progressive liberalism's influence everywhere, he argues. The New Deal, the Great Society. Even, Republicans supporting interventionist policies sometimes. It shows how broadly it's been embraced.
So progressive liberalism takes over domestically, but Mearsheimer also brings in human nature, right? How does that fit in?
Right. That's absolutely central to why he thinks realism ultimately wins out in international politics.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that we are fundamentally deeply social beings. Individualism is important, sure, but it's secondary.
Okay.
Liberalism, he contends, kind of downplays this social nature. It treats people more like atomistic actors, separate individuals, not deeply connected members of groups.
There's nationalism and realism.
They are more in sync with this social human nature, he argues. They recognize our fundamental group loyalties, our drive to survive as a collective, usually as a nation. People are loyal to their nations first and foremost, seeing them as vital for survival in a dangerous world.
So liberalism is based on a flawed view of us.
That's his point. This mismatch between how liberalism sees human nature and how people actually group together has huge implications for foreign policy. Liberalism, in trying to make everyone an individual rights bearer across the globe, clashes with the stronger pull of national identity and survival.
That's a really counterintuitive point. Liberalism misreads us, so its foreign policy is flawed. Okay, so if liberalism is pushing this ambitious foreign policy based on what he sees as flawed ideas about human nature and misapplied domestic ideals, what are the real-world consequences? What does the book say are the specific, tangible results, especially after the Cold War?
Well, the book paints a pretty grim picture, really. He details what he calls the folly of liberalism abroad. He points directly at the pretty dismal record of U.S. efforts to promote democracy and human rights, particularly in the greater Middle East.
Afghanistan, Iraq,
Libya, Syria, he goes through them. The tragic outcome, he argues, wasn't stable democracies. It was death, disorder, civil wars. Just chaos, really.
And he even links this to nuclear proliferation.
He does. He suggests this interventionist approach might actually incentivize countries to get nukes. He uses Gaddafi in Libya as an example. Gaddafi gave up his WMD programs in 2003.
Right, I remember that.
Only to be overthrown and killed, with Western help, in 2011. Mearsheimer argues other countries might look at that and think, maybe a nuclear deterrence is the only way to stop that happening to us.
Wow. Okay, and what about Ukraine? That's so tragically relevant right now. How does he connect that crisis to this folly of liberalism?
His argument there is that NATO expansion, which was driven by Western liberal ideas, expanding the zone of peace, bringing more countries into the democratic fold, was seen by Russia as a direct existential threat.
Because Russia operates on realist logic.
Exactly. From Russia's perspective, thinking in terms of power and security, bringing Ukraine into a Western security alliance right on its border, that looked like a massive strategic encroachment. He argues that perceived threat, not some inherent Russian aggression, was the root cause of the crisis and the war that followed.
So the attempt to spread liberalism triggered a realist reaction.
That's the core of his argument on Ukraine, yes.
Yeah.
And he doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
He also argues that pursuing this kind of liberal hegemony abroad has bad effects back home.
How so?
Corrosive effects on civil liberties, on due process. He points to things like the NSA surveillance programs, Guantanamo Bay holding people indefinitely without trial, drone strikes that bypass normal legal checks.
Right.
In these cases, he argues, the government prioritized security and its foreign policy goals over individual rights. He also talks about government secrecy, even deception campaigns used to basically sell wars of choice to the public.
Wars of choice meaning?
Meaning wars not fought for direct survival, but to spread ideals or protect rights elsewhere. He says it's hard to get genuine public support for those without sometimes misleading narratives, and that, he thinks, chips away at democratic accountability at home.
Okay, so that's a really sharp, comprehensive critique of liberal foreign policy. Given all that, what's the alternative Mearsheimer proposes? Why does he argue a realist foreign policy, especially a restrained one, would be better, more stable?
He advocates for a foreign policy based on realism, and the core ideas of realism are, first, the international system is anarchic. Not chaotic necessarily, but no world government, no global 911 you can call.
So states are on their own?
Pretty much. It's a self-help system. States are the main actors. Their number one goal is survival. And because you can never truly know another state's intentions, what matters are capabilities, power. So states compete for power.
And alliances.
They're temporary, based on shifting interests.
Yeah.
Because, again, there's no higher authority to guarantee your safety. You ultimately rely on your own strength.
Okay, standard realism.
Right. And this is really crucial and maybe counterintuitive for many people. Mearsheimer, an offensive realist, argues that realists like him are actually less likely to push for war than liberals are.
Less likely. How does that work?
Well, a few reasons. First, realists focus on a very narrow set of vital strategic interests. For a big power like the U.S., that's basically its own neighborhood, other major powers, and maybe key resources like Persian Gulf oil, historically. They aren't interested in universal crusades to remake the world.
So a much more limited scope for intervention, only if absolutely necessary for survival or core interests.
Exactly. Very selective. Second, realists have, frankly, learned from history. They see the failures, the immense costs of trying to socially engineer other countries, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. They recognize it's incredibly hard, expensive, and usually backfires. They're just deeply skeptical of those kinds of projects.
Less optimistic about changing others.
Much less. And third, realists tend to have a Clausewitzian view of war. They understand its inherent uncertainty, its complexity, the fog of war, the potential for things to go disastrously wrong in ways you never intended.
So a healthy respect for how messy and unpredictable war is.
A profound respect, yes. It breeds caution. Mearsheimer argues that liberals sometimes aren't serious students of war itself and underestimate these dangers. They might see war as a tool, maybe even a necessary one, for spreading democracy or human rights. Realists, because they're so aware of the risks, are far more reluctant to start fights.
That makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. So, okay, bringing this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of the world today? Why should Mearsheimer's arguments matter to you?
Well, I think Mearsheimer's work really highlights his belief in the need for critical thinking, especially today, with just information overload, simplistic narratives everywhere. Understanding these basic theories, liberalism, nationalism, realism, gives you a powerful toolkit.
It's different lenses to see things through.
Exactly. Helps you make sense of why leaders make seemingly contradictory choices. You can see beyond the surface explanations and grasp the deeper forces, the often clashing logics that are at play. It just helps you ask better questions, form more informed opinions about what's going on.
Okay, so just to recap the main thread here, John Mearsheimer's The Great Delusion hits us with this really challenging argument. Liberalism, fantastic, a force for good within nations. But use it as your guide for foreign policy. He says it becomes dangerous, delusionary even.
Yeah, leading to conflict, instability.
Right, and potentially harming liberalism at home, too. Instead, he argues for realism, that sobering focus on survival, power, restraint. That's the more stable, more prudent path in this anarchic world we live in.
And Mearsheimer forces us to question that core Western belief that spreading liberal democracy automatically makes the world peaceful.
Yeah.
What if it doesn't? What if our best intentions, our most cherished ideals, when we try to export them with that crusading zeal he talks about, what if they actually become a source of chaos, not harmony?
It forces a pretty fundamental rethink.
It really does. A rethink about international relations, America's role, maybe any liberal power's role, and the unintended consequences of even our best aspirations on the world stage. It's definitely an uncomfortable perspective, but one that urges a critical look at our own assumptions.